So, hi everyone. Welcome to A Girl in Love with Tech podcast. My name is Rachel Rabo. I'm a Microsoft Power Platform developer, a Dynamics 365 CRM developer also. And before I forget, I'm a Microsoft MVP. Yeah, and this podcast is this podcast is broadcasted live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and my YouTube channel. So don't forget to follow and subscribe. Thank you. And our special guest for today is Fabian, and we are going to be discussing everything Microsoft Graph. Hi, Fabian.
Hi, Rachel. It's so good to meet you. I think I've seen your content all over the place. I feel like I know you, but this is literally the first time we're speaking, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
me
you
too.
want me to
And I'm
introduce
looking forward
myself?
to learning a lot in Microsoft Graph. Yes,
Yeah.
please. Yeah.
All right. So, I'm wearing my branded Microsoft Graph T-shirt even as well too. So, my name is Fabian Williams. I'm a senior product manager on the Microsoft Graph Custom and Partner Experiences team. But if you've watched LinkedIn recently, you'd have seen Jeremy Thick mention that there's a new expanded team, with a new remit that he
Yeah.
has, and the larger team now is the Microsoft 365 DevX and CPX team,
Wow.
which is Microsoft 365 Copilot, DevX, and CPX team. So everything now is really around Copilot, and now there's a developer experiences team, and there's still the customer and partner experiences, the CPX team that I belong to. And
Yeah.
I've been at Microsoft now for 3+ years, coming up to 4, and I'm a
That's
former MVP.
amazing.
I know, yeah, time goes fast. I'm a
Yeah, it
former
does.
MVP as well. So I'm glad that you're in the program. Definitely, your contributions is certainly warranted. So we're lucky to have you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you so much. Joining the Microsoft MVP program is amazing.
it's
Yeah,
good.
it's amazing. And for our listeners, maybe this is the first time they are hearing about Microsoft Graph.
Mhm.
So, what do you think, like, on your own explanation, what is Microsoft Graph?
Sure, right. So I would say Microsoft Graph has evolved from what it was in terms of just how people interact with it. So the definition I'm going to give is probably the definition that people see most of the time. So
Yeah.
it's the one singular API that allows
Okay.
you access to all of the underlying, data and services within the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. So if you think about it from the perspective of, whenever you send an email, and the fact that you and I have exchanged emails, and we put stuff on the
Yeah.
calendar, and I'm working on documents to prepare for this or a PowerPoint presentation. Those are all applications that represent the underlying data. Email being
Yeah.
one, chat being another, and stuff like that. So the Microsoft Graph provides a singular API that allows
Okay.
users of that API to access that data and surface it to be able to enrich their own experiences or other experience
Yeah.
inside Microsoft. And it's one SDK to use, one set of documents, one set of authentication in order to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I
Mhm.
think something I love so much about Microsoft Graph because I attend the Power Platform community call, like the
Mhm.
Microsoft 365 community call, and I see a lot of demo on the Microsoft Graph and how Microsoft Graph extends Microsoft 365. It's really,
Yeah.
really amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Absolutely.
amazing.
And
And
the one. Yeah, go ahead. I was
yeah,
gonna say
no,
that.
continue.
Yeah, I was going to say that the one thing that why I say that Microsoft Graph has somewhat expanded in terms of how I would define it is because traditionally Microsoft Graph really lends itself to developers, hardcore developers, people that write, C Sharp and .NET and so on and so
Yeah,
forth. But now, especially in your world that you live in a lot, which is basically the Power Platform, the Power Automate space,
yeah,
Dataverse space, it has expanded where you
yes,
can use different type of toolings in order to get to Microsoft Graph as well and expose that data in different types of canvases. Plus, if you're an IT pro as
yeah,
well, you can use in PowerShell as well. So it's no longer just the hardcore dev; it's really expanded to really
yeah,
be inclusive of professional code developers and low code developers as well.
yes.
Mhm.
That's amazing. Many
Yeah.
citizen developers can also use Microsoft Graph. Yeah, so
Absolutely.
yay.
Yeah, absolutely. We welcome it.
Yeah, it's amazing. And another question I have to ask you is that how can individuals utilize Microsoft Graph in their day-to-day role?
Sure. Well, um, let me take that question. It's a great question because you said utilize, and
Yeah,
that's an important word, right? So I would say right off the
yeah,
bat, especially individuals,
yeah.
individuals are using the Microsoft Graph either passively or actively, whether they know it or not, right? So from a passive perspective, I'll give you, for instance,
Okay.
when you open up Outlook and you start to type in a person, well, let's say you open up Outlook and you're going to send an email and you put your cursor in the to line. What you should see as an experience is that you should
Yeah.
probably see either the last few people that you talked to or interacted with, or people inside your organizations, and that
Okay.
would pop up by default. And then you can start to type in things and it will probably autocomplete.
Yeah.
A lot of that
Yeah.
feature that saves you clicks or saves you, hunting down stuff is the Microsoft Graph Insights, saying, okay, this is a person you last worked with, maybe trying to send an email, or you come out
Yeah.
of a meeting, let's put that person up the front. So passively,
Well, that's
that's a
amazing.
Microsoft Graph. Yeah, that's part of the Microsoft Graph.
Yeah. So
Now,
yeah, I had no idea. Yeah.
yeah, it powers a lot of things underneath the seams that people really don't realize, but that's part of the power of it. It is like that silent giant that does a lot of work. The other way, though, from a actively using it, as we talked about before, is
Yeah.
you could the first place I would send people if they want to even play around with it is this link. It's aka.m. Let me actually see if I can paste it inside the chat.
Okay.
Get
Yeah,
it to you.
that'll be amazing.
aka.ms/GE for Graph Explorer, and that's a great place for people to start
Okay.
working
Let
with
me put
Microsoft
that.
Graph, because it allows you, even if you don't even have a M365 account, you can use it in the context of a demo account. Usually you see Megan Bowen, but if you
Yeah.
have your own account, you can actually authenticate and it'll give you back information. You basically click on a link and it basically opens up Graph Explorer, and it gives you back profile information, Teams information, email information. So it's a great way just to get started out so you can actually see how it
Yeah.
works. But obviously if you have tooling like
Yeah.
Power Automate as well, you can use it that way as well too.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. So,
Mhm.
if you want to get started with Microsoft Graph, please visit this website so that you can get
Mhm.
started with Microsoft Graph. Yeah, because this is
Yeah,
that is the
nice.
aim of today's podcast, and so
Yeah,
that you can
get
learn
more
more
people in.
about Microsoft Graph. Obviously,
Yeah.
yeah. So, another question I have to ask you is that okay, you gave a few examples of
We're having audio
Can
issues.
you
I
hear
can't.
me?
Yeah, no, it's going in and out.
I
Sorry.
think my Yeah, I think my network is
I know we're,
bad.
we're halfway across the world. We're halfway across the world. But go ahead. Repeat it again. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay, I said I asked a question earlier on how individuals can utilize
Mhm.
Microsoft Graph in their roles. But I have
Right.
another question that I'm curious about is that how can
Yeah.
companies actually utilize Microsoft Graph?
Right. So it's not too different between individuals and companies, but it's a great question. In fact, I'm gonna break it into two. So when you think about Microsoft Graph, and this is something that you'd ask, but we can go deep, and I didn't want to go deep for the first question, but
Yeah,
there's a consumer version of Microsoft Graph, and then there's an
yeah,
organizational version of Microsoft Graph. So in that lens, you could say that there's a consumer access to it, and there's also an organization access to it. If I'm answering the question now about how organization will start,
okay,
then I would start off with the assumption that that they're building a solution around either for their own organizations, or they're an ISV, an independent software vendor, or a SI, systems integrator, building solution for others. And in that sense, the
okay,
foundation of that is that whether it's their own company or others, they have a Microsoft 365
yeah,
subscription and they're using M365. So if they're doing that, then
Yeah.
their users also are using, what was previously called Azure Active Directory, but now called Entra ID. And everything around the Microsoft Graph is
Yeah.
really centered around the user. So similarly, they'd go to Microsoft, aka.ms/GE just to figure stuff out and maybe do a proof of concept as an organization. But we also have tons of other resources. We have, you know, uh, Postman collection, which allows you to mock things up in a different the two
Okay.
different permission models that we have for Microsoft Graph, because there's one permission model that's known as
Yeah.
delegated permission, which is where you're working on in the context of the user, and there's one where you can work as a service
Okay.
account, so you basically work behind the scenes. We have a lot of documentation out
Yeah.
there. We have a lot of starters in terms of get you going with solutions that you just press F5 and it starts to work. And we have the dev
Yeah.
advocates that actually put out a tons of content as well too. So lots of different ways for people to get started, whether they're organization or
Yeah.
individual.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I love the way you explain the Microsoft Graph, because when a lot of persons hear Microsoft Graph, they think it's like something so big that they
Mhm.
can't use. And for you to say that everybody's actually using this already because we are all using it passively, you understand?
Right.
So it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really, really amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And
good.
for our listeners who are, yeah, and I think you have pointed a lot about how people can get started with
Mhm.
Microsoft Graph. So I would like to ask if you can share a few scenarios or case studies on how Microsoft Graph can be used, like scenarios, maybe a user story of Microsoft Graph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. In fact, this is actually a great segue into how I actually started my role at Microsoft. So when I first joined Microsoft 3+ years ago, one of the first projects that I was given was actually to create something
Yeah.
that allowed everyone to speak about Microsoft Graph in the same way. And the term that we came up with was Microsoft Graph Blueprints. And they were typically
Okay.
nine. There were nine different what's the word I should use? Nine different scenarios, if you will, of how people engage with the Microsoft
Yeah.
Graph routinely. And a lot of it is like photographs, files, teams,
Okay.
chat, meetings and events, and so on and so forth, search and so on and so forth. So,
Yeah.
so the scenarios that I would say you want to unlock typically lends itself around that. And how I would pitch it is that, especially for the photographs one, is right if you're building a solution, you have choices that you have to make in terms of how you want to go about it. One typically is storage. So if you're an
Okay.
organization and you're building a solution, where do I store my assets? And one asset can be the profile picture of the person that you're going to be interacting with, because I'm seeing you now
Yeah.
on screen, you're seeing me on screen.
Yeah.
If I'm building a solution, it's important, exactly, it's important to see each other. That's
Yeah.
how you basically build connections. So if you want to have a sticky application that really works, profile picture is important. So
Yeah, it
if
is.
you're developing something, then the choice then becomes: do you want to have the person upload a picture and then store that picture in blob storage, or store it in in whether it's AWS or inside Microsoft Azure, or even on your own infrastructure? That's a choice. But if you're building a solution around
Okay.
Microsoft
Yeah.
365 and Microsoft Graph, we already have your profile picture. So just use the endpoint of
Yeah.
/me/photo, and now you have a photograph. And the bonus is that you don't have to store it. You don't have to maintain that infrastructure. And also, their
Yeah.
experiences in native Microsoft 365 will become exactly the same experience in your app. So basically, there'll be
Well,
it's easy to build that brand, because, oh, I look the same over here, I look the same in this app, and it's just an
yeah.
easier learning
Yeah.
curve. So that's one scenario. There's many others, but that's
Okay.
usually the scenario I lead with.
Yeah, sure, it's amazing.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's pretty amazing. And I think there was a time I spoke to someone, which is Chris, and he said the best way to learn is to actually build and learn. So pretty amazing. So if you're getting started with Microsoft Graph, start and build alongside. So yeah. So
Yeah,
learn and build alongside your learning.
yeah.
Yeah. And I have another question to ask. Like,
Mhm.
what are the benefits of Microsoft Graph?
Right. Great question again, too. So the benefits, building upon what I just gave as an answer before, is if you're using
Yeah.
the Microsoft Graph, it it's a quicker path to a successful product or services that you're building, because you're leveraging
Okay.
all of the APIs that we've already tested, that we've already vetted, that we've already proven out, and also the same
Yeah.
APIs that we at Microsoft also are using to build our products. So it's trusted. So that's one way.
Wow.
The other way is
That's
that, as
amazing.
I know, right? You're building up. So
Yeah.
it behooves us to create a good product, because the same product that we're using, we're also asking you to use.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
other one is like the infrastructure cost, as I mentioned before. So rather than creating your own infrastructure and paying for that infrastructure, whether it's in storage, whether it's
Yeah.
inside VMs or otherwise, then you can just leverage M365. So you can just say, in the case of
Okay.
the photographs, as I mentioned before, let us
Yes.
manage that so that you don't have to manage that. The other
Yeah.
aspect, which is somewhat, under the current, but's there, but it's important, is trust. In the
Okay.
times that we're living right now, where you want to basically have a trusted source.
Yes. Very
Microsoft,
true.
has its own, it's responsible AI. It has its own trust
Yeah.
mechanism, its own compliance, its own security model. So
Yeah.
if you're building your solutions on top of that, you also inherit that. So your
Yeah.
customers can also trust what you're delivering, because you're leveraging the promises of Microsoft through Microsoft 365. So
Yeah.
those are some of the principles that I would say that are important.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think a lot of persons, they're actually a lot at least most companies or all companies, they're actually they think about the security first.
Hmm.
So with you using Microsoft Graph, you are definitely inheriting security.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Security by design,
And
security by
for our
default.
listeners, yeah, yeah, by default. Yeah.
Mm.
And for our listeners, most of them might, because you mentioned API, most of them might be thinking, okay, what is an API? So if
Mhm.
you can just give a bit of a view on
Sure.
API, what an API is. Yeah.
Right. So the Microsoft Graph exposes itself through API. So let's define what API is. So application
Yeah.
programmable interface is the definition for API. And what
Okay.
it's a contract, if you will, between um, a system and its users, and also the developers. So
Yeah.
the API that we have for the Microsoft Graph now also has two endpoints. It has a beta endpoint, it has a V1 endpoint. The V1
Yeah.
endpoint, version one, is the one that's used in production. And you have the beta endpoint for things that we are either thinking about, it's just not quite
Okay.
production ready yet, or we're testing things out. And
Yeah.
it provides methods or actions, if you will, that you can take through it. So if you're thinking on API, you're using something called HTTP verbs, and those verbs are basically
Okay.
your gets. So get me something.
Yeah.
Your post, you're
Yeah.
putting something in. Your update, you're
Yes.
changing something that already exists, and your delete. So those are like, we call them
Yeah.
CRUD: create, read, update, and delete, CRUD methods. And the
Okay.
API itself can either be what's the word I'm trying to figure out here? It can either be anonymous, or it can have credentials. The Microsoft
Okay.
Graph does require credentials, and the credentials are
Yeah.
basically allow you to define the scope of what you can do within the API. So let's say
Yeah.
that the underlying data is, let's say that you and I are exchanging an email, and we're using the
Okay.
Microsoft Graph to create a solution that is going to help me with my emails, or help the person with their emails. I can
Yes.
only see the things that are about what I did. I can't see the things about what you did unless you and I are in that
Yeah.
exchange together. So that permission
Okay.
model
Yeah.
is also part of it as well too. So the API takes care of both the permissioning model, it takes care of
Yeah.
your underlying data, and it also aggregates information. So what I mean by aggregating is that um, one of the things the graph gives you is not just the data, but also insights and signals. So I can see the top
Okay.
10 people that I work with a lot. So, that's,
That's
remember the example I
amazing.
gave. Yeah, the example I
Yeah.
gave you before about the two line. That's how it knows
Yeah.
to give you this person a two line, because it puts things together and figures stuff out
Yeah.
where it's not just the data alone. So the API provides that rich layer for you to do that.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the explanation.
That's a good
Yeah.
developer. It's a developer explanation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love the way you broke it down too. Like any big words you said, you had to explain it in a simple term. Yeah. So thank
Yeah.
you. And another question I have to ask you, I think if you have any questions, you can ask your questions on the comment section. Fabian is here to answer all questions you have on Microsoft Graph.
All the broad term. I'll answer as much as I can. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And okay, I have the last question from me.
Mhm.
I want to ask, does Microsoft Graph have a certification part?
So, that's a great question. I'm not sure if there's a certification path around Microsoft Graph, and that's just my
Yeah,
ignorance on the topic. However, I would say
yeah.
that we have a ton of learn paths,
Okay.
LEARN learn paths, and that's
Yeah,
where the dev advocates and also the developer experience part of the new team that Jeremy is now leading will come in. So I
yeah.
do know that like people like Waldeck Mastercards, Dan Wallin, Aicha Bass, Bob
Yeah.
German. I'm gonna miss a few people. I know that. I apologize. Rabia Williams. She has my last name. How can I forget her? But
Yeah.
they create a ton. They create what's known as learn series or learn modules that allow
Okay.
you to get. It's almost like a recipe book. It's a getting started. Then let's go one layer deep. Then let's go another layer deep. And it's all you're working your way from like
Yeah.
100 level all the way to 400 level. So I'm not sure if it builds towards a
Yeah.
certification. It might. I'm not sure, but that's one avenue of doing it. But then there's other things that we put out samples on GitHub. I know, like Waldeck and myself, we've written. In fact, let me
Okay.
grab you this. I'm gonna grab you another.
Yeah, that would be perfect. Yeah, thank you.
So one other way, and this is not a certification path, is we create code
Yeah.
samples. And these code
Okay.
samples help you along the way in terms of like building solutions at Microsoft Graph. Again, the idea is that we don't want you to start with just a blank canvas. We want to be able to help you
Yes.
to be successful. So we're going to give you everything so that you can be successful, whether it's a certification path or you're building something for your own company or just your own learning.
Yeah.
You're just curious. Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. That's good. Yeah. Really, really good. Thank you so much. Do
Okay.
you have any advice or anything to say to our listeners?
Yeah. Well, one is that the Microsoft Graph is an inviting API. The Microsoft Graph now actually,
Yeah.
if you're seeing everything about Copilot, it is the center
Yeah.
of what you will see inside almost every Copilot, imagery or screenshot or stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because the Microsoft Graph is what's grounding that data or helping to ground that
Okay.
data and also the user as well too. So whether it's Copilot, whether it's just your own
Yeah.
application, whether your application is
Yes.
for consumer or for work, the Microsoft Graph,
Yeah.
is a tool there to help you to become successful. And whether it's the documentation or just ak.ms/ge, which is for Graph
Yeah.
Explorer, or the learn modules or sample codes, or our team, we're here to help. In fact, on our team,
Yeah.
we have programs as well. So my colleague Brian Jacket, he heads a program
Okay.
called the Microsoft Graph Technology Adoption Program, TAP for short, TAP, and that is a
Yeah.
group where we invite ISVs, independent software vendors, if they're building solutions on the Microsoft Graph, to sign up. In
Okay.
fact, let me grab you a link for that one as well. How to join the
Okay.
TAP
Sure.
program.
Perfect.
Yep, and this will help you. You asked previously, how can organizations, build solutions? So if you're an organization, build a solution on the graph,
Yeah.
join our TAP program. Our TAP, we meet the first Wednesday of every month at 8 a.m. Pacific, and you get to be plugged in with the product teams. We bring different people in to talk about the different
Okay.
API endpoints, and you can ask questions as well. I also
Yeah.
lead the MVP program around Microsoft Graph. I was looking forward to seeing you at MVP Summit, but I guess I
Okay.
probably won't. You're not going to make it. Maybe another time. But
Yeah, I don't know. It's too short. Yeah, time is too
too
short
short
to
if I know
prepare.
this. I totally get it. So there's also the
Yeah.
MVP program that that I host a call, which is the third Wednesday of the month. So this coming Wednesday, we're actually having a PGI, a product group interaction. And we
Okay.
also, Vesa Huvinen, he's a principal product manager in Finland. He and I host a call
Yeah.
on every Tuesday, and and you're on the community call, exactly.
Yeah.
So the community call
Yeah, I
Tuesday,
do.
and that's
I come every
also
time. Yeah.
yeah. So those are different
Yeah.
avenues of how you can engage
Yeah.
and get involved in the Microsoft Graph. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I
Mhm.
think I'm waiting for you to share. Okay, I think you have sent it. I just need to pick
Yeah.
that up. Okay, just give me a minute. Just pick that up. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Happy New Week.
You
Yeah,
week as
thank you,
well.
Vivian.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Good to meet you,
Yeah,
and have
bye.
this chat. Bye.
Yeah, thank you.